Are you inspired? Are you an inspired leader? We've all had bosses that we thought they need a little bit of help. Well, this is the chance to get that person, maybe it's you, help to find your purpose. And this is going to be where you can do it, because you're going to hear from Tony Martignetti, and he is a fantastic person. And let's jump right in. Hey folks, all right, this is going to be a fun one because you get to dive into finding your inner purpose, how to go to the next level. And this is where Tony Martignetti comes in. He's the founder of Inspired Purpose Coaching. He is somebody who's lived the life and helps others to get there. He's a prolific author, content creator, and also just a real inspiration himself. I don't want to belabor the point and overtalk the intro because this is just a fantastic conversation. However, I gotta say one more quick thing, because if you don't mind, if you can do me a favor and you just make sure you know what to do if you've watched these kind of videos before, just hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, smash it if you so desire, up to you. I'm no like buttons have been hurt through the course of these videos, so you can do whatever you like to it. And drop me a comment. You like this stuff? Fantastic. You don't? Let me know. Let me know what we can fix, what you'd like to see more of. All right. Without further ado, this is Tony Martignetti on the DiscoPosse podcast.
This is Tony Martignetti, and I'm here on the DiscoPosse podcast. I am the founder and chief inspiration officer at Inspired Purpose Coaching.
Perfect. All right. You're a pro. You've done this. Well, you're a podcaster. So this is where my favorite thing to do, Tony, is to invite professionals on of all backgrounds. You have many backgrounds. You are coach, author, professional. You've got an incredible background as far as how you came to coaching, and also a podcaster. So thank you very much for joining. For folks that are maybe brand new to you, that haven't figured out how awesome they're about to find out you are, if you want to give a quick bio, Tony, and we'll talk about Inspired Purpose Coaching, and we're going to cover a lot of ground because you've really got an interesting background that I want to delve into.
Well, thank you. So there's a lot of pressure there. Wow. So no, I'll keep it quick, but I would say right now what I'm doing is I'm working, to guide accomplished leaders who are feeling unfulfilled or stuck in their current path to really overcome that and find what's next on the horizon for them. And there are leaders who are either in startups or who are in transition or who are in the corporate world, and they want to stay in their job, but they just want to find that reconnection to what really lights them up. And how I got into this, I came from a background in biotech, where I spent 25 years really in high tech, then biotech, in the finance and strategy capacity.
And the thing about what you've done is you've covered a lot of, really, really core stuff that folks sometimes don't even realize they need, especially, founders. They're at different phases of the growth of the organization. It's very easy to get lost in the lack of purpose or sort of lose sight of how to map the vision and the purpose to the day-to-day activities as they grow the team, as they start to change the way they operate as an organization. Mm-hmm. And so this is why I thought this is ideal, because I talk to people all the time. I feel like one of those weird, like Twitterati startup people who just says, like, I've interviewed over 200, startup founders, and these are the lessons I've literally listened to over 200 startup founders. And, it's fun because what you see is you start to see the commonalities, but they don't see it because when you're in the throes of it as a founder, as a creator, as a president, even just a team leader, you really, really can't look outside of yourself sometimes. Tony, how did you get into the business, or when did you understand that coaching was something that you really were passionate about?
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to make I love the way you described what you just said, and then I'll tell my story, because there's something about that oftentimes we don't, recognize those things about ourselves, that other people have the same struggles, that other people have those same, issues and concerns, until we start having those conversations. That's why my tagline, if you will, is inspiration through honest conversations, and it starts with having conversations with ourselves, which is a good lead into what got me into coaching in the first place. So I had a moment in my life, well, two moments that really stand out. One of them was where I was, moving down this path of, creating the career that I wanted, or at least I thought I wanted. And I kept on working really hard to move towards the C-suite in the corporate world. And as I did that, I had this like singular focus saying, this is what I'm going to do, keep on moving forward, do whatever it takes to make that happen. And I did it to the detriment of everything else in my life. And it led me down this path of burnout and depression, really. And what I discovered is that I wasn't being myself. I wasn't doing this for the right reasons. On the outside, people saw this person who's like making it happen and, successful for the most part. And for them, I always put on a happy face, even despite all the inside turmoil that I was going through. I was able to overcome this. There was a lot of inside pain, darkness that I dealt with, that I was able to flip through many different vehicles. Therapy, meditation was actually a huge help. An unhealthy amount of self-help books, I'll put it that way. And
I think we all, that's unfortunately both, comically true and a little bit frightening. That phrase in itself is something we, I think, all fall victim to.
Yeah. And then basically, and it's funny about that because, you have to integrate what works for you. And that's one of the things that I've people often ask me this. I get all this advice from different places, and what's right for me? Well, what is right for you? You got to figure out what works for you. Try different things, and then really see what fits you personally. But anyways, I digress. After really coming through that dark period, I was still in the industry, and then I continued to feel better, continued to see more clarity, and then I had this moment where I was sitting in a boardroom of a biotech company, and still in my finance strategy role that I was holding. And I realized that I had to stop what I was doing. I was not doing the work that I was meant to be doing. I was collecting a paycheck, a healthy paycheck, and I was not really loving the fact that I was doing this. I actually saw leadership that wasn't really connected with inspiring people and moving people forward. It was more about self-preservation and, stroking their own egos, if you will. And I realized at that moment, I said, I got to stop this. I need to change the way people show up as leaders, and I got to do what's right for me. And so I decided to leave the room. I walked out, and I said to myself, my first honest conversation with myself that moment was, in order for me to change this room, I have to leave this room. And I did.
Wow.
And that was the moment that was scary because I had no plan. I didn't know coaching was the vehicle or a vehicle to make that happen. But it was. And that's what really happened. As I started to unwind that moment, it was the vehicle that started to really get me to think deeper about who I am and what are the gifts that I had to offer to people who wanted to go deeper and have those conversations and find out what it is that will allow them to have a deeper impact on other people as leaders. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but you asked.
This is perfect. And, people should dig in for a moment on this. Like, we often hear, when we talk about business growth and there's the pivot, and we fail sometimes to understand that there's a personal pivot moment, and it is often unexpected, frightening, and it has to be sudden. It is something that on the other side of it, you're sort of forced to rethink and go right back to first principles of forget about how I got here, like an Etch-a-Sketch almost, just like, okay, it begins now.
Yeah.
And it's, if we all look back, you know, they may not be as sort of dramatic and you know, they may actually be, but they may not feel like that. You've highlighted a very specific and inspiring story of this like moment, you know, and like I said, you walked into that room having no idea that halfway through this sort of thought process, you're going to be like, I have to leave. And it's amazing now to see that, well-deserved, you know, years later now on the other side of this, Tony, that it's come to allow you to do what you've empowered yourself to do. Yeah. It's almost like we have to give permission to ourselves to escape, right? But how hard is it for us to do? Like, human nature is to just keep pushing. How do we, like, why is that? You know, I mean, is it born into us that we've just been, or is it sort of nature versus nurture that we really have trouble seeing the opportunity to just stop and restart?
Well, I love that you say, well, permission is such a powerful word, but it is that. And I think part of the whole thing that I realize, and I'm eternally grateful to this one quote to really kind of unlocking a lot of the journey for me, is, you know, comes from Peter Bregman, who's another coach who I really respect and honor. He talks about emotional courage. And I think emotional courage is the word that really comes to mind when I think of what we need in those moments to take that leap forward. And then this quote is, if you're willing to feel everything, you can have anything. And that's really what it was all about, was really kind of, we hold ourselves back from feeling things because we're afraid of them. And when we're willing to be open to feeling all the feelings that are out there, having that courage to experience the emotions and not just stuff them down, then what happens is we actually live a more full life. And I thought about this just to kind of take the slightly bigger picture, is that I often wanted to run away from my past. Like, I didn't think like, okay, now that I'm moving to this new world, you know, shake the Etch-a-Sketch and like start from a clean slate. But in fact, it's not quite like that. You have to embrace and deal with the past, and really kind of embrace that, integrate it into your future so that it becomes a strength for you to move forward with.
How important is this idea of, you know, being able to know that you sort of have to sort of embrace change, scarce, you know, opportunity, but choice. And also being able to weigh it against, I'll say, plan B, right? You often hear this when we talk about amazing creators and founders and folks that make big changes in their life, that some of the greater minds often say, like, I had no plan B because if I had one, I wouldn't have gone with plan A. But for most of us who aren't Elon Musk and, you know, those type, like super type A personalities, I mean, personally, I could say this from experience, right? I make a lot of changes because I know in the end that I could literally go back to the thing that I did. I could cut lawns, I could fix shoes, I could get into retail. If it all comes down to it, I'll do anything to support my family. And I know I can do a lot of these things. So it gives me a bit of freedom to walk a slightly different path in a few different areas. But so I have to sort of keep that in mind. Like, I've never want to, but I know that, like, it's a bit of a safety net, I suppose. And it's not a really good safety net, truthfully. Like, you don't want to have to go do that. But for me, my choice is that I can make bold changes because I know when it all comes down, I can do that. But for most people, I'm just curious, Tony, as you coach them towards a moment, embracing change, taking, this sort of, that sort of, the release of control is the capture of control, which is always a funny thing for people to understand.
Yes. I love that you say that.
How often and how important is it that they understand that there is a backup plan, but don't lean on it too hard, kind of thing.
I love that you bring this up, because there's something about this that I've been talking about for years, even well before I became a coach. I was talking about this book called The Startup of You, which was authored by the founders of LinkedIn. And they talk about this concept of your plan A, plan B, and your plan Z. And I think this whole concept is so important, because we're always having to think a few steps ahead, because the world is evolving, we're evolving, things are always changing. So you can't get too comfortable with the world as it is. So you have to be thinking a few steps ahead. We are startups. We are companies that are constantly having to change and think, what's next? What's next for me? What happens if the ground underneath me shifts? If I'm not ready for the next shift, how can I be prepared for that? And I love this idea of, constantly thinking about, why define myself as where I am right now? For many years, let's be honest, I defined myself in a box of, I'm a finance person. I'm the finance guy. Literally, I've said that many times. And when people said to me, "Oh, you're not the typical finance person. There's something about you that's very different," I would tell them, "That's great, but this is how I get paid." And so therefore I would ignore the clues, put myself back in the box, and continue on. So I think we need to start thinking about ourselves as being very dynamic and very open and full of possibilities. We're not boxes. And so that pivot of having that, a focus, having that plan, but also being open to the possibilities of what could be next for me, because I am limitless. I am not in a box, and I can't let the world define me. I have to allow myself to be free to explore other areas that could unfold. Now, there's a lot of scariness to that, and not all the pivots are going to work out, but that's exactly why you have to constantly be thinking, what else? What else could be possible?
But if we look at, we often hear from people that describe themselves as serial entrepreneurs. I would actually say that every entrepreneur is serial in their attempts. You very rarely see the hours, the attempts, the changes. Like most people I talk to who are in their 40s and who are founding another company, and you realize it's their third one, and maybe they didn't all go well. But then it even goes further back to they started a lemonade stand. They started doing garage sales as a teenager, just to, the mindset is kind of there, and their willingness to continue to attempt is really what gets them. That's culture of experimentation gets them to the point where they understand that, it won't always work like you described, right? And I think the hardest part for me is, unlocking people who sort of got pushed into those roles. They may have it, like a lot of us have this. Not everybody needs to be the super, type A, or I say I'm type A minus. I'm not the type A, but I like to lead, but I don't want to be fully responsible for it. It's not my game. But there's a lot of, people that are sort of, we call it rank and file, which is such an awful phrase, right? Yeah. But there's lots of people that are in there that, when given practice and time, they find their opportunity, they find their voice, their raison d'etre, the thing that they're like, I actually can, inspire a team or lead a group or do something, right? It's really interesting to see as people have to evolve and discover that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to connect with that for a moment, because there's something about that I think is so interesting. There's this idea that everyone has something inside of them that's dying to get out. And it's not to say that every person is going to be, rocketing a ship to space. That's not everyone's calling. But the idea is to not leave anything in the tank and to not, die empty. I know that seems very dire, but the idea is to basically not leave your song unsung. And so if that song that you're waiting to sing is something that means, it's not quite as grand as flying a rocket to space, that's okay. But if it's just means like going a little bit further than where you are right now, then that's great. And I want to make sure that those people who in that space who are just holding themselves back because they feel like I can't do that. That's not who I am. That's not what I'm capable of. Then I want to stop them and say, you're capable of whatever you want to create.
Yeah, it's this thing of it's about being better than yesterday is one of my favorite descriptions of it. It's what's the 1% change we can make today that is incremental, and as we do that, it becomes effectively like a compound interest. If we continue to look for small opportunities, next thing you know, you feel again the strength of the base as well as the comfort to experiment a little further. And it starts with like getting a taste. And I'd say also, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Tony, is adversity. Like sometimes it's actually quite important that we trip, that we discover a little bit of challenge, because often if you go ahead, like that was it. And look, I know this is a total lie, but we always love to say it. It's like a team that goes all the way to the Super Bowl with nothing but wins will lose the Super Bowl, and it'll be horrifying. Like they almost have to lose along the way to be ready, to be hungry, and to like not want that. They want to hate losing more than they want winning. And as humans, I think we maybe not quite that extreme, but I think we do need to like navigate a little bit of negativity to understand that we can get through it.
Yeah, I think there's something about, I would say 90, well, maybe 85 to 90% of us love the underdog because of that. We love to have that connection because we all feel that way. We all feel like we're the underdogs who have to go through all the trials and tribulations to then feel like, wow, like we've overcome that adversity to get to that place where we can now feel the taste of victory. Well, and all this has really got me thinking, so I'm not sure if I told you, so I have this book called Climbing the Right Mountain. The book is really about, people trying to connect with the right path for them. And oftentimes we get so hung up on what the definition of success is that is imposed upon us, that we should want something, that we should, drive down this path. The reality is the right mountain is the one that is not always going to be the easy path. It's going to be full of adversity. It's going to be full of struggle. It's going to be full of growth. But the reality is how we feel about it. It's how we connect to that struggle. And the reason, that we should be feeling a sense of fulfillment and happiness along that path, not waiting till the end and feeling like, oh, I can't wait till I'm, at that place, because when I'm there, then this will be all worth it. Because guess what? It may not be.
That's right. Well, and quite often there's an off ramp along the way that we actually find is the right one. And it's good to have this, these large, goals where we aim towards a thing, but, and even look, startups find this all the time, right? Where they realize the thing that they're actually good at is not the thing they thought they were going to be good at.
Exactly.
And in listening and in pausing to understand where your current like measuring of success is, that allows you to say, okay, I'm kind of 80% here and 20% over here, but the vision statement says I'm supposed to be over here. Well, maybe we need to just adjust.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. This has been coming up a lot for me lately, but hearing this sentiment that your customers will tell you who you are.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I mean, at first glance, you're like, what does that mean? But the reality is it's true. They define like what it is that you really do. If you start to go out there and say, this is what I do for the people who are around me, ultimately, you're not quite understanding how people see you. You have to let people see you, see how you impact them, whatever it is, your product, your service, whatever it is, until they have experience with what you do and they tell you, this is what I get from you.
Yeah, the idea of sort of like mushing your customer's face into your plan of how they're supposed to use your product or service. It's sometimes it feels that way because we often get told, right? We're sort of Steve Jobs was famous for this thing of people don't know what they want until you show it to them. But at the same time, he that was a big visionary thing. But when it came down to it, then they began to measure feedback and understand. You can't just keep going out there saying, you're wrong, we're right, and keep listening to us, because they'll stop listening, they'll stop buying. We all renew, $2,000 phones every 2 years. He was actually right, but he was right at the beginning, and then we were right for the rest of time together because they listened and they were guided by, where they could be successful. It's important, same as, like mountain climbing, racing, anything you do, you have to partly look at where others may have tread. You have to look at something that looks a little insurmountable and then find that interesting combination. And the best thing to do is to look to somebody who says, hey, if I show you this, what do you see when you see this? How do you use this? And especially product managers fall victim to this all the time. You're like, no, that's not what we built it for. And then you almost want to tell them, like, I actually think that they've discovered what you really built it for.
Yes. It reminds me of and I'm no marketing expert or anything, but I do love the marketing concept. I just wrote a newsletter that's going out shortly about marketing myopia, and just kind of rethinking it, and how interesting it is that concept of what you think your industry is and what really the industry is. You have to be very careful about defining who it is you are, and what work you do, because ultimately it might be something else. And it made me think of this, one of my favorite concepts in coaching that I'll say I coined it, I guess, but it's just something that I say to my clients that, like, expand your vision, narrow your focus. Oftentimes we're staring at a wall and we think like, okay, I don't see a path forward, or I don't think about a way to move forward in my business or in the way in my life. So what I'll do is I'll tell them, like, well, maybe you need to step away from what you're doing, expand your vision, see bigger, see new possibilities. And once you do that, then you can see some new action ways to move forward. Focus on those, narrow it down. Don't try to be doing too much. And then once you do that, you can, execute effectively.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely, as a sudden, discoverer of photography techniques, because I've been mucking around with new camera stuff for the first time in my life. It is very true of, like, even the way that we physically view things, and because our mind interprets it this way. There's a reason why the background behind me is gently blurred, because of the focal length of the lens. And there's a variety of things that every photographer would be horrified if I tried to say what it is, but I just know that I can set an incredibly wide shot and change the focal length so that only what I want you to focus on is truly in perfect focus. And this is the way our mind interprets it. That's why photos are done this way, why video work is done this way. We can move the way that you are and thinking just by simply changing the focal length. And it happens in life too, right? If we look around physically in the world, there's 1 trillion objects that we take in. Like, your mind is visibly seeing 1 trillion things, but you can't. I mean, even if you just try and count, you'd come to 100 pretty quickly, and then you'd run out of things to talk about. And it happens in your project plan, in your business plan, in your life plan. That if we, like you said, if you look around and try to do everything, what do they say? If you try to do everything, then you'll do nothing, or whatever. Try to be everything and you'll be nothing. It's so easy to get wrapped in. I fall victim to it all the time. I every once in a while I have what I call it to-do list bankruptcy. I just like, okay, that's it. Whoosh, I just scrub it down. I don't even look at what it was. I just basically tape it shut, delete every task, and say, okay, what do I actually need to get done today? What are the 3 things that I can do today that will have a meaningful impact, and reset? But that's why I want to talk to you, Tony, because I know you've been doing this for a long time. You're seeing people. This is not a one-time thing, right? Like, even folks that are successful still can fall victim. They can still struggle. They still hit points where they need to be sort of reinvigorated and recoached, and revisited. I'm just curious how, it's hard for us. We think that you're just going to buy a book and it's all right. That's it for the rest of my life. The book saved me. I'm done.
Yes. I love it. So one of the things that I was thinking about too, when you were saying about your to-do list, I was thinking about the Etch-a-Sketch again. I just want to put everything in Etch-a-Sketch. Everything should be like that. Because that way you have the chance to just kind of shake it up and then start anew. So we'll do that from our to-do list going forward.
I think the only problem I've got is that depending on the age of our listeners, I may have just shed half the people that are like, what the heck is an Etch-a-Sketch? I don't know if they still have, Etch-a-Sketches are still a thing, but they were when I was a kid.
Yeah, they were a big deal. But anyways, so yeah, I love that you bring this up, because I often say that there's a paradox in productivity. And one of the things that in this, I'll get back to why people need to be coached on an ongoing basis, is that this one concept is something I want to share. It's this element of the paradox of productivity, which is that structure creates freedom. And when you're talking about to-do lists, it made me think of this, is that you need to create some structure around your life to allow yourself to be able to create the space to create your life, which is weird. I think about it this way. If you just show up to your day, if you show up to your life, your week, and you just say, okay, whatever shows up my inbox is going to be the thing that I'm going to react to. It becomes really draining, because what happens is you're just in reactionary mode the entire time. What I've come to see, and it's a lot of things that I work with my people on, is creating that, the time boxing and the, themes for days that really allow them to see that this is a day that is for me to be back in place, to get back on my schedule, to get back in the place where I can create what's important to me, to focus on the things that are important to me. And when I respect those time blocks, then what happens is it allows me to move forward in the things that are most important to me. So that structure that you can put in place, it actually allows you to move forward faster and more effectively. So I just wanted to bring that up because it was something that you were talking about to-do lists. I'm like, yes, that's something that, people always think, oh my gosh, I don't have the time. And I'm like, well, it's just how you're managing your time, how you're managing your energy.
Right.
It's so important. But back to the, this whole idea of, coaching and when people really need, there is no one size fits all. I try to treat every person who comes to my door, we've all got our own unique ways of being leaders, and we're all leaders in our own way. We have to tap into what we need in this moment and how to lead forward in our own unique way. And we have to continue to tweak it and fine tune it and have a tune-up diagnostic from time to time. And so I think that's important, is that when you find yourself off the rails, come back to what's not right now? Where am I not aligned with who I want to be in this moment? And what are the things that I need to do to really get back on track to what I want to be doing? So that pause moment starts with the pause. as always, is the most important thing you can do, because oftentimes it's easy for us to get trapped into this. Okay, I was told to do this and I'm doing this, and now it's not serving me any longer. What's wrong?
Yeah, this is the other thing too, is we look for somebody who has walked the path before us ultimately to help us towards this path. Like it's one of the greatest guides, right? If you look at, successful entrepreneurs, successful product builders, successful athletes, they use inspiration from folks that have generally sort of led before. But then, of course, the coaching as a practice doesn't necessarily need you to same as therapy, right? Therapy is a process. It's a methodology that, requires obviously human understanding and empathy and a lot of other things, but also even the way that we need to continually recheck and revisit. And, also coaches need coaches and therapists need therapists. So, Tony, I'm curious, what's your process of setting your own bar? Because you're in the business of helping people to set their bar, to climb the right mountain. How do you sort of take time and recheck on where you are in your goal structure and your life?
Yeah. So I'm so glad you bring this up, because, the answers are not, lying inside of me all the time. I have to constantly be thinking, like, what's next for me? Like, what do I need right now to move forward? And I have coaches, I have my own guides. Often the things that I'm helping people through are the very things that I struggle with too. And it's because of the fact that I struggle with them that I have developed some of the tools. I have a lot of the thought process around them because I spend a lot of time living in it. And that's what makes it powerful, because I'm not just sitting here and saying, okay, try this. Oh, maybe this will work. Oh, that might work. I'm giving them some things that I've actually tried out and maybe even experimented with on my own, so that I can tell them, like, this might work for you, but it's all going to try. You got to try things out. But back to your point, I mean, it doesn't mean that I was a marathon runner and I can't train I can't train a marathon runner. It's all about creating the space for people to explore deeper and build that trust with the person around you. And I think that's what's so important about the coaching engagement. People have to understand that it's about having deeper conversations and having a thought partner who's willing to allow you to experience that experience. It's not quite as simple as a conversation with a friend. It's a lot more than that. It requires a bit more of a skill to be able to see through people and to be able to uncover and even challenge people through that conversation. But it doesn't necessarily require that I've walked the same path that person's been down.
Yeah, and I guess this is what, I mean, we talk about therapy and coaching and mentoring. It's not about telling somebody what to do. It's about asking them the right questions to guide them towards what they actually need to do.
Yeah.
And it's hard for us because, especially when you go there, the first thing you want, if you want to go to a therapist, you're like, my life's a mess. I hate myself. What do I do, doc? And it's like, well, they're not going to say, well, you know what you need to do, right? There's a funny comic, which is a kind of horrible. I mean, I got a bad sense of humor for this one. It's called Mr. Boffo. And it's this guy, he's this crazy sense of humor. And he's a guy talking to his therapist. He says, doc, my friends all think I'm crazy. And of course, the doctor says, well, why don't you kill them? Like this is what goes through the mind of somebody who's absolutely lost everything. And it's so, like, we just expect sometimes that I'm going to go to you and I'm going to go, Tony, I've got a meeting in an hour. I need to know what to do right now. And like, that's not what coaching is for. Coaching is meant to light your guiding lights, to focus you on it, to help you discover it. But it's frustrating sometimes because the same reason why the self-help book section is larger than the fiction section, although some may say they're both the same. We we want to open a book and have 220 pages be the answer. In fact, if anything, based on social media and 140 character lifestyle, we want it to be 11 pages long and it just tell me the answer.
Yeah. It's funny, that's some of the most challenging conversations I've had have been with my coaches who have challenged me by asking simple questions that then stick with me for like days on end. And I'm just like, why did you ask that question? Or why did they ask this question? Because I just want it to be easy. And that's the question that I get the most. What if it was easy? What would it look like if it was easy? That question is one that sticks with you for a while because you're like, well, of course I want it to be easy. But that question holds a lot of clues because sometimes we do make it harder than it is. We make it complicated sometimes.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, this is the other thing, which it's there's only so much you can give somebody as far as guidance. They ultimately have to take the step. They have to walk the path. They have to do the thing. It's even, look, if you scroll through social media, if you look on commercials and advertisements and you see, I do coaching and mentoring. I do a bunch of things. I help people to, build, websites. I do podcast coaching, all this crazy stuff. And in the end, you carry them to a point. You walk beside them. Sometimes you feel like you're pulling them. That's how it starts off. And then you're walking beside them. And then you're maybe sort of gently walking behind them, giving a little bit of nudge. And then at some point you step back and they're actually on their own and they don't know it. It's almost like training wheels for the process. But they still have to take the steps and do the things. Like, this is why, forget about get rich quick, but all these books you read about how do you, make money online, it's like, okay, great. It's a 3-year plan. Be like hold on a second. I don't even know that I can get through this week. But it's not wrong. Most people won't walk it, right? This is why coaching is important, but it also, you have to be careful that you don't think the coaching is the answer. It has to be found in yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you bring this up because there's an element of there's no fast passes in life. I mean, there's elements of listening to other people's stories and allowing them, taking in the lessons and, hearing their trials and tribulations as ways to help you along your path. That's great. And I think that's where the gifts and the tools come from. But there's no fast pass. You can't get past the element of like, going from 0 to 100 in one day. And that's why when we talked about social media earlier briefly, but this is what we often look at everyone else's middle and we're comparing to our beginning. And I think that's where people get so frustrated because it's like, why can't I be like them? Like, I'm doing everything that they're doing. And, why am I not, getting what they're getting? Well, because we haven't looked at their journey to getting what they've gotten to. And they're not just starting out. They've actually done a lot of the work to get to where they're getting to. And so patience and persistence, those are the things that we really need to really appreciate along that journey and continuing to try new paths, try different things. You can't just continue to bang your head against the same wall and expect different results. So that's part of what, really helps you to kind of explore new ground. When I thought about, my coaching business, or any business for that matter, there's many waves that you're trying to catch, right? And you're trying to think about which wave is the right one for me. Well, the only way you're going to figure that out is by taking many waves and seeing which ones are bust and which ones are, are going to be great. And they're going to be the ones that are going to really take you to shore. So just get out surfing.
Yeah. And so this is an interesting one too, because the unplanned isn't really as unplanned as it seems sometimes, because even if it's just that you've readied yourself for the process of something new, and podcasting is a great example, right? You've been podcasting now for 2 years. You've got fantastic guests on your show. One that I really enjoyed actually as well, especially was was the one that talked about burnout and this idea of negative behavior patterns that you had with Janice Litvin. And it was one that stood out because it's something I've been struggling with a little bit lately, and it's very easy to do. You can ride the high, and then the moment something goes wrong, you're like, oh, of course you're worthless. It's just very easy. Just like, you guys, like, how does that happen? I can help somebody's life out. I could do something amazing, and then I walk into the kitchen. I say, I shouldn't put this cup on this plate because it may fall, and it does. And I say, of course it did. Like I get angry that I didn't listen to myself. But the reason why I pull on the podcast is it's a labor of love. It's a thing that you're going to have to put commitment and time into. And when you start it, you've kind of sort of got, I'll say, a dotted line plan, like a hopeful idea of just like, I'm going to make this a thing. But it's very hard to really plan something like that. And it's very, as I find with most people, they make it to about episode 10 and then the wheels come off the bus because they kind of run out of quick topics to fit it in, finding people to speak with, finding their own voice and how to have the conversation. But this whole thing of, like this long path, your own journey, right? So you're I would say a very successful podcaster because I love the style of your discussions. But when you started, did you have that plan, and how much of it just sort of formulated as you knew it needed to just by trying it out?
Well, I'll also say that, I didn't know what I was doing when I started out, and I just kind of like was winging it. And I was very nervous at the beginning. So if I were to go back to some of the earlier episodes, I probably would cringe a little bit. But
I always tell people start at episode 50. That's where like things, I figured it out by then. You feel bad for the first 50 guests because you're like, I don't think I know what I'm doing here.
Yeah, but I think one of the things I realized is that I went into it with this expectation that like, what am I doing this for? What is the reason why I want to do this? And it really came down to just, I wasn't in it for, I'm going to get as many likes as possible. I'm going to try and get as many, I just started to see these humans who had these amazing stories, and I wanted to be a champion for them. And if I served that person in front of me as a champion of them and I'd give them the space to share their stories, it made me feel as though I was doing my job. And then as I started to kind of see that come to life, it started to become something that I could just show up every day and find the energy to do the thing that I was doing. I kind of put myself like in the background of the whole situation. And everyone who came on the show, and I don't mean to like, be like patting myself on the back, but they would always say that like, there's something about this show that, that has made it special for me. Like I've explored areas of my life that I never thought I would. And I've been on 1,000 podcasts before. And I'm like, wow, that's interesting. Like I'm just showing up and being me, and, and you're being you. And that's, I think what all I ask for is that we be real and share from the heart. And I think the great thing about it is that I continue to do it because of the fact that it inspires me. And that's one of my favorite sayings is that, look for signs of look for signs of what lights you up and do more of that. And this is one of those things where like, if it didn't light me up, I wouldn't be doing it.
Right.
But it truly lights me up to see people's stories unfold, and then to see the impact that it has on other people. I mean, have people email me and say that podcast episode was something that really touched my soul and now gives me some energy to move forward in my life. That's gold.
And of course we'll have links. It's the virtual campfire, which is a really, really fantastic show. So we'll make sure that we point people towards it because they should put it in there. It's always a neat thing where at first you look for the guess, or the story. Quite often you find the podcast, you're like, let me give this a whirl. And then you try a couple of episodes, and then you dig into the archives and you look for a specific guest or a story that may be impactful. And then at some point, one of my favorite things that I love hearing people say is that, like, I picked something that I didn't think I would have any interest in your guest list. And that's where I really had fun, because they, at some point, that's the process that's in play, is that, like you said, it's everybody's got a story. And when you can help them to air it out. What I'm always amazed by too is I call it the back half of the podcast. My favorite part, because I do a lot of folks that like, hey, let's talk about our company or our product or whatever. And I'm all well and good. I love letting people do that with breathing space, which is why I do a longer form. So I don't want it to be like 20 minutes, then try and have like the last 4 minutes be, so Tony, let's talk about you. Like, no, I want the back 40 minutes to be about you. Because you run out of talking points at about half an hour. That's generally what everybody bumps into. They're like, oh, so you ask a question and it's like, now it's them. You're really exploring a human story, even though it's, wrapped around them coming to you as a company founder or a product owner or develop whatever it is, a coach. I've got amazing people, but you just get right to really, really very nicely unlocking people's freedom of expression and them being comfortable in sharing their story right out of the gate, which is nice. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, it's great to have that. This is fuel for the journey, if you will. Yeah. So, thanks.
Well, and this is, again, when you start to looking back, and everybody in life should look at this, at some point, you start to find the connective tissue that this wasn't actually some non sequitur thing that you did. It ultimately, it gave you, as you said, fuel for the fire. I do this because I'm in product marketing, technical marketing, in founder, like in the startup advisory, I discuss with founders. So effectively every discussion I have makes me and my clients stronger, my peers stronger, because we look and said like, oh, yeah, I shared this great conversation the other day. And it continues to light my fire every time you have one of these discussions. And then the side effect is that, it just, everything comes together in the end. So 5 years later, what I find is that when I look back over anybody's life, like, that little hobby they did wasn't a side hobby they just wanted to try. It actually very much shows you what is their thing, right? What is their particular, right mountain that they're after. But it's hard to find it until it's kind of occurred. And then you realize like, oh, so you tell me you like running. And I'm like, but maybe you're not running, and a friend of mine, I apologize, I'm long point here, but anyways, somebody told me one time, they're like, I love writing. Like, oh, that's awesome. What kind of writing do you do? Well, I was really good in university. Like, cool. But like, do you write, you're looking like, fiction, nonfiction, technical writing, whatever, like this, like obviously writing's fantastic. There's so many avenues you can do it. I was like, do you have a blog? Do you have anything? Like, no, but I was really good at writing. And after many, many discussions, they finally realized that like, I was just told I was really good at writing. And so I hung on to it, but I actually don't like writing. Like, they were good at it, but I'm like, if you're 10 years later and you haven't written a thing, I think you don't like writing.
Yeah. Or, the funny thing, and I'll just kind of like to add to that, it's like, there's something about that sometimes people get afraid of being judged. And so even though they say that, I was really good at writing, or maybe they had a passion for it, but they're afraid of not being good. And so it's sometimes they have to give themselves the space to practice in private and just play around, like use it as a playground and then see what transpires. Because I think there's something about that allows you to, to not be judged by other people, allow yourself to have fun with it. And then maybe someday it becomes something.
Right. Yeah. This is a friend of mine. He was in a successful, successful in that he paid his bills, you know, as a musician and as a guitarist. And he said he would tour around North America. And he says the amazing thing is you'd play in these clubs and somebody would come up, and he was a fantastic guitarist, like just sort of like very, very sort of Eddie Van Halen-ish like type of level of capability. And people would come up, they're like, "Oh my God, John, you're fantastic. I'm having a party over at my place with a bunch of my friends after. If you guys want to come and hang out." And it's like, he said, you get all these funny invitations because you're in this like little weird town. He's like, "What are you going to do? You're going to go to the, you know, the Comfort Inn where you're staying with your band?" He's like, "Let's all go over to this place." And they'd be like doctors, lawyers. And then they'd be like, "Come check out, this is my studio." Or like, "This is my guitar." And they'd see like a wall of guitars and these amazing players, but that's not their thing, you know? So you'd say like, how can you be a doctor and be so good at this thing? You're like, that's actually their thing. They use it as their real distraction. And sometimes it works out well that a distraction, you know, a passion can become a job or like what keeps you going day to day. But he said it was amazing to see these people that on first brush, you'd think, how could they possibly be this incredible musician or author or photographer? But like, we don't get a chance to give ourselves the belief that people can be something that we don't expect them to be, which is weird, right?
Exactly. I love that. I love seeing that. Like, I love being surprised by people, you know? And that's the thing, is that we sometimes need to surprise ourselves about what is possible for ourselves, because we don't give ourselves enough latitude to try things out and see what's out there for us. So
when someone comes to you, Tony, and I'm curious if this happens much, but they often come to you with their belief in what their problem is. Like sometimes we already sort of fabricate what we believe the real problem is, but you have to sort of help them to understand that it's actually just a symptom of the real underlying problem. Yeah. How often is it really the case like that? And how do you help them to really get to the root of what's going on?
yeah, I would say that 8 times out of 10, that's the case, is that there really is a surface level problem that they're coming to me with. And when we have those conversations, we can dig deeper. And the ones who do, those are the ones I most enjoy, playing with. And of course, I would not name names, but I think they know who they are. The people who really have that underlying issue, and you get to explore deep inside with them and see that there's something deep down dying to come out. That's where you really find a client who's looking to do something big in the world. I think I'm wired for people who want to have an impact in the world and who want to have a legacy that they can be proud of, but they're not so maniacally focused on one thing, that they're kind of open and they see themselves as this person who can do many things. They see possibilities, but they don't always show up in that way initially. They sometimes have to be like coaxed out of that place. But the biggest challenge for me, and the kind of clients who really don't resonate with me as much, are the ones who are just, okay, what's next? What are we gonna do now? Like, we sit there in silence, and I'm having to like really push and push and push and push, and I have to impress upon them. I'm like, hey, I can sit here in silence too, and we can have a moment of silence. And silence is a very powerful tool for getting people to see that there's more to be said.
Yeah, there is one. The silence is one of my favorite parts, because when you learn to enjoy it, there's a surprise on the other side of it almost always. I did a really long form discussions with a few founders, and just for lack of time, I didn't keep the series going, but it was like 3 hours and really going through like the same sort of set of questions. And it was amazing talking with somebody, and it was before I did the visual side of it as well. So I'm seeing a Zoom window, and it's like somebody who's pacing around, and I said, like, what's the what's the hardest thing you've had to face, as a founder that no one could understand, but they've got to realize that they have to be ready to experience it. And he literally was like, it felt like 30 seconds. It was probably 15, which is an eternity when you're in a conversation. But it's very easy for us to go, like, as an example, like you wanted to then feed the thing, and I could have guided him, but I just let it go.
Yeah.
And he just like, you could see him, he's like looking down and like, furrowed his brow and like almost as if like, is it okay to say this? And he said, I don't think that I've got enough funding to get through the next 30 days. And I think we may have to shut down if we can't do something. He's like, I was like, and I just like I was like, I'm just going to let this air out. And he says, I've actually got a call with an investor right after this. And I don't know that we're going to make it through this. And just giving him the freedom to just be comfortable in being scared was amazing. Now, luckily, on the other side of it, he actually was successful. It was a bootstrapped company. They've got a customer, but it's like that moment. If I had just sort of like filled him with an idea that I thought would be compelling, it wouldn't really give him the chance to unpack. And it made such a beautiful story, to hear it in real life instead of so easy for us to just want to fill air.
Yeah, I love how you share this, because this is exactly coming back to what we said earlier about emotional courage, is that courage to be able to admit the things that are really happening deep down that we mostly are not at liberty to say. And oftentimes, like, think about it from the perspective of the corporate world. You could say like, oh, we have peer groups, CEOs have peer groups, and, C-level people have peer groups out there. But even in those groups, it's hard to admit when you have a flaw or something that's going on for you that's real, because you don't want to be seen as weak. You don't want to be seen as somebody who's not making it the cut. What if you get kicked out of the group?
Right.
Theoretically, I'm just, jokingly saying that, but it's true. I mean, there's an element of, sure, you're my peer, but I don't feel comfortable sharing my deep, dark secrets with you. And so a coach or, a trusted advisor can be somebody who says, look, I'm not going to judge you for this. Let's get this out. So you can feel like at least it's a release valve of sharing what's deep down so that it becomes real. And then you can move forward from here.
Yeah, there's athletes bump into this. There's that moment where they don't know that they're going to make it. And there's something they're able to often self-discover only from practice of reaching that moment, having a coach carry them through that moment, that they, when facing it alone, have been given the tools and the understanding that they know they can get through it. And that's really what a lot of this is. And that's why I love, like I said, when I see somebody like Tony as inspiring as you that can do this, this is about it furnishing you with the understanding that you can do it. And a book doesn't do that. A book doesn't ask the questions that then gives the air gap to let the answer come to the surface slowly. Mm-hmm. The book is meant to be a fast read, carefully edited, that's why I really love, like I said, your podcast is great, because it really and truly explores the emotion of the discussion instead of the beauty of the story of the written word is that it's artful. When I see great editors, they create great content. There's nothing wrong with a fantastic book. But when there's the nuance of the pauses and the discussion and the change in the vocal patterns, and you really know that somebody's like, this is meaningful, but it's cool.
Well, I wanted just to add one more point there, just to say that, one of the things I've come to discover, and first of all, I was an artist as a child, and I've reconnected with this, the arts a lot lately. And one of the things that I've come to see is that conversations are a piece of art. The work we do as coaches, as podcasters, it's an art when you create a conversation that really connects two human beings in a conversation that goes so deep that it actually uncovers these beautiful ideas and concepts and feelings and emotions. It's like I see that as a piece of art.
It is. It is. I tell you, then the one thing that I'm looking forward is a strange little thing that I love, that I miss. I don't miss traveling for business, that's for sure. But what I do miss was the being in the travel process in an airport. And I would sit often with headphones in, but no music on, just mostly just be like, I'm in do not disturb mode. But to watch the crowd, watch these little things go on around you, and you find these moments that are occurring in real time all over. Sort of people watching is such an exciting thing. And now we have to go out of our way to see that, right? Like you have to purposefully set an appointment to be able to see somebody.
Yeah.
And as we close up, and I know we're getting close to the end of our time here today, Tony, but when you went through the last couple of years, and seeing the shift, how have you been able to help people to remember that like we will get back to that, like to allow them to just experience it, not schedule it in, because we won't schedule it in. We won't, right? It's very hard for us to say, like, I need to set an appointment to do a thing. It organically occurred. And then we said, okay, now I need help with it. Now we feel like we need to schedule everything. So, what advice would you give for folks now to like be free to experience and to explore?
Yeah. Oh, I love this question, because there's an element of this which says that, like, first of all, don't like be so held back by the anxiety that you're having, because you'll have anxiety. And I've had a few people who've gone back to the office and have told me, like, I've gone in and I've felt like, oh my gosh, like, what do I do now? The first thing to do is be compassionate with yourself. Take it slow. Don't freak out and, kind of immerse yourself immediately into this space of being with people. So have some compassion, allow yourself to integrate. But when you do, allow yourself to just take a moment and breathe it in slowly. Take a slow breath, like a meditation. Conversations can be like a meditation when you bring it in and allow it to like wash over you, because this is a gift. When we get back together, it's a gift to be able to be in the presence of the people. It's what we are meant to do as human beings, is to be in person with other people. We didn't have Zoom back in, the early days. We had campfires. We were told stories around campfires. So let's go back to the way we used to be as humans and just have conversations in person. But just be compassionate with yourself. Take it easy. Slowly ease yourself in, and allow for yourself to take it all in like a breath.
Amazing. Tony Martignetti, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. So for folks who want to find out more, as they should, you can go to inspiredpurposecoach.com. I'll have links in the show notes as well. Check out the Virtual Campfire podcast, which is a real must listen. Great exploration of human stories through conversation. And I'm happy to have been able to share a conversation time with you, Tony. I feel better now than this. My favorite thing is that at the end of it, it's like I feel inspired to do something. You don't even need to know what it is, but you know that you care more about doing something than you did an hour ago. And that's a pretty fantastic feeling to be able to have.
I feel the same way. So thank you. I can't thank you enough for having me on the show, Eric. This has been so much fun.
And if people want to connect with you, Tony, what's the best way to be able to reach out?
Well, the best place is to go to my website, inspiredpurposecoach.com. And the other place is you can find me on social media. LinkedIn is probably the go-to spot. And then also grab my book on Amazon, Climbing the Right Mountain.
That's it. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.